from the Federalists and Anti-Federalists to the Whigs and Democrats, and finally to the Democrats and Republicans, there have been two major parties since the late 18th century. It's a long-standing practice, yet it is still very controversial even to this day. Various opinions exist regarding the two-party system in the United States. Among these are that the system should be abolished and replaced, that it should not change, and that it should be reformed. Outspoken voices of this controversial issue include politicians, voters, minorities, and the general populace. There are three inherent issues for my topic, and they are representation for minority voters, polarization, and voter suppression. Now, through my speech, I'll go issue by issue, listing each perspective and justifying them with evidence. And for the purposes of this speech, reform and replace will be under one perspective. Firstly, for representation for minority voters, in a Washington Post article from September of 2020, in an article entitled "Why Third Parties Should Stop Running Candidates for President" by political author Paul Waldman, he highlights the futility of third-party candidates who run for president. He gives an example of the 2000 election in which George Bush won the state of Florida, and thereby the entire election, by only 537 votes, because Green Party candidate Ralph Nader received 97,000 votes. The Green Party is much more similar to the Democratic Party than the Republican Party, as they believe in environmentalism, pacifism, and grassroots politics. He states, third-party candidates won't win. They can only siphon votes away from candidates who agree with them on some things, but not everything. Minority voters simply detract from the two main candidates. The current system limits their impact, and really only two-party candidates can win. In the Victoria Advocate from November 2016, reporter Catherine Cargo writes in her article, "Should the U.S. have a two-party system?" and she quotes Congressman Ron Paul, who is a libertarian but ran as a Republican. He highlights that proportional representation, as opposed to a two-party system, would lead to people voting their conscience, and that would be much fairer. People would vote what they truly believe instead of just aligning with party ties. On to the second issue of, for the perspective of keeping the system, in The Conversation, which is a news publisher, from March of 2020, Alexander Cohen writes an opinion piece entitled "The Two-Party System is Here to Stay." And he says, parties address an important issue in democracies. People have the freedom to ask government to do things, yet the voice of any single individual is quiet. Parties amplify individual voices by combining them into a louder, cohesive message. Political parties make sure that many voices are heard. The two-party system gives a voice to the populace, and it wouldn't be fair without it. In the Washington Post from February of 2018, in a response to David Brooks, who is a New York Times commentator, who claimed that the two-party system was doomed, they referenced a 2016 poll in which 57% of respondents said that they were disenfranchised with the two-party system. But the problem is, these people aren't civically active. If we were to change this long-standing system, it wouldn't affect many people because the people who don't like it don't participate. Changing the system which would not affect many. On to the next issue of polarization. In a letter from John Adams to Jonathan Jackson, he states, "There is nothing I dread so much as a division of the Republic into two great parties, each arranged under its leader in concerting measures in opposition to each other. This, in my humble apprehension, is to be dreaded as the greatest political evil under our Constitution." And even many of the founders were scared of having two parties, of having these factions. And a lot of founders would not agree with the modern two-party system. In another article from The Conversation in February of 2020, they posted an article titled "Something Democrats and Republicans Have in Common: Exaggerated Stereotypes About Both Parties." They list a study which found that Democrats and Republicans view each other much more stereotypically than they actually are. And under the current system, individuals create unfair stereotypes of the other side. This leads to unnecessary conflict, and a non-two-party system would be less conflictual. There wouldn't be any cultural wars. In the Encyclopedia Britannica, under the two-party system article, it highlights that the system moderates conflict. Parties must cater to a wider audience, and this mellows out the views that they take. Previously mentioned in the two-party system is here to stay article, he says that in the system, parties must go wide for electability, and typically The parties that do this are the Democrats and Republicans. Parties must create these wide-ranging campaigns in order to gain traction. This leads to less polarization because of these broad beliefs. Now on to the final issue of voter suppression. In an article entitled "Funny Shapes Aren't the Problem with American Voting," which is reference to gerrymandering, in New America Weekly from February of 2016, he says that partisan redistricting makes districts more competitive, but they cause more issues than they solve. In a Truth Out article from September 2022, Ashley Shelton, who is the executive director of the Power Coalition for Equity and Justice, in her remarks, "The black voters are fighting racial gerrymandering in Louisiana," she states, "Freedom is a long game. It is also a perpetual struggle. We will never get to the point where we can shift to cruise control. That is not what our ancestors fought for. This moment requires no less than to hold the line on what they fought for and to continue to position future generations for success." The two-party system creates political gerrymandering, which has been used to historically oppress many minorities. It's just unfair. On the opposing view, attorney Hans von Spakovsky echoes a Supreme Court decision in his article "Why the Supreme Court Got It Right on Gerrymandering" from the Daily Signal in June 2019. And he says that the Supreme Court held partisan gerrymandering is beyond the reach of federal courts. There are no manageable judicial standards where you can draw the line on how much politics is too much in gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is a long-standing practice. It's constitutionally protected and both sides use it. The previous reference article from Alexander Cohen, he also remarks that parties simplify voting. You can just simply go in and vote with little background. This can alleviate oppression from those who are uninformed, and often the most uninformed are the busy, marginalized communities. This would expand voting for many. It makes the system a lot easier to understand. The two perspectives I covered were those who want to change the system and those who want to keep the system. The issues I covered were representation for minority voters, polarization, and voter suppression. The crux of this issue really lies on civic education. And as we are more civically educated, not only can we avoid the drawbacks of the two-party system, we can also reap the benefits of the two-party system. We can find more common ground, and as we all civically educate ourselves and look for the common ground, we can be a much better functioning society, and a lot of issues can be solved.
1, 2, 3.